It's April 2021, and you're watching The Lookout, a production of the Division of World Languages and Cultural Studies here at Minot State University. I'm your host, Samuel Stinson. On board, we also have our co-host, Robert Kibler. And on today's episode, we're going to be interviewing Linda Olson, a professor of art here at Minot State University. Linda, hello, welcome, and thank you for being on the program today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
What is your general overview of how you view art, and what type of art do you usually create?
I'm free rein to make the art that I want to make. It usually involves clay. I'm a ceramic artist, first and foremost, but I have been called on to do many things in my life, and I have become passably good at enough of them with good practice. So, but generally, I like to make objects, and I've done a lot of like the traditional arts, basket making, of course, your fine art media. I started out as a K through 12 art educator, and I did that for a couple years, but as such, you're required to be a studio generalist. So you learn about a lot of things and not necessarily with the depth that one can. So I went on then to really follow my love of ceramics and make ceramic objects.
Yeah, I might just sort of add that Linda and I went to Washington, D.C. as delegates to meet various ambassadors as part of an international program. And Linda's art we presented to the ambassador from Nepal. And that evening, we went to his house for dinner. And by golly, we presented it in the afternoon. And in that evening, it was in his living room. So Linda's an international artist. I also have her work on display in my house, too.
I do have work in the sister city Sheehan's Art Center as well. So I do have some small success with having my art viewed in different locations.
I'm going to take a moment and ask Linda if you would give us a little context for, you provided us some samples today. We're going to show those on screen right now. If you could give us a little bit of an explanation for these pieces themselves and a little bit more about them individually.
I took a class in 1987 at the University of North Dakota from a person who became my mentor, Dr. Lawrence Lohendorf. And he got me involved in documenting petroglyphs and pictographs, the images left by people on rocks. Any surface that is available throughout the world, people have created art on, and rocks are especially long-lasting. People know a lot about rock art in other places, but many people don't know that there is an abundance of rock art in the United States as well. So I became well known for documenting petroglyphs primarily, also some pictographs, and did like pictograph cave near Billings. But my primary research area has been from central Wyoming, and I presented you with a few images from that work.
Yeah, I wonder, Linda, you mentioned just pictograph and petroglyphs. What's the difference between those, if you could?
Rock art comes in different styles. A petroglyph is something that's etched, sometimes as fine lines, sometimes as totally picked on a rock, where a pictograph is something that's painted on a rock. There also are petroforms, which happen to have been the most common kind of rock art in North Dakota, in our region, and those are formed by laying smaller type boulders out on the ground in a pattern, making an image. A is just like in inventory documentation. You would take a photograph like this with a menu board that would have a scale and a directional indicator for the north, and then the information about the panel so that you can relocate it, you know where it is, so it gets tagged in that way. So B is a very tall figure that it's very hard to see on the rock, but I do have the tracing that I did of it. But C is actually the tracing of that figure. Many years ago, I got involved in rock art by doing those tracings. I could be very patient, and I could stand by a rock for a long, long time and trace around all of the individual peck marks that you might see. I became fairly well known for that. And the illustrations that produces are really quite fine and quite accurate, which are two very important things in rock art. So a lot of the time when we look at the figures, they're very hard to see. This is another one that, you don't really get a good sense of what's on the rock there. But when you look at the drawing of it, you can kind of see this is a drawing of that rock. And the figure on it is like a shaman figure, and it has horned headdress. It's got some kind of plant associated with it. There's a little figure down beside it, a number of different things going on. It's really quite an interesting figure. It lies underneath an overhang cliff, so it's down underneath, and unfortunately, the erosion, and this is why it's so important to have accurate documentation of them. In a lot of instances where these are exposed to the elements, they can deteriorate more quickly. So this is another figure. This is just very close to that last figure, and it's a figure of a bear. And the light passes over these panels, and in some instances, I think they were probably used as timekeepers. This one has a series of vertical lines on its chest, and at different times, the sun would pass over those lines in a certain way, a certain time of the year. And also on that panel, on the solstice, there's like a block of light that comes down and actually intersects this round circle that has a line around it and comes right through that area. So I think that sometimes they had something to do with timekeeping. The next image, which is G, is actually a panel that we called the timekeeper because the sun would work its way down one side. This little figure has two lines going up, and the sun would work its way down one side and line up exactly with the other side on the summer solstice. So this is a picture of the sun passing over that panel. So you can kind of see how this little notch and then the shape of that would actually line up exactly with that. So it gave me a great respect for how the indigenous people could manage how to keep track of time, the astronomical time, the clock that we're not so in tune with because we have this other clock that we look at. I is a thunderbird. This is from over near Yellowstone Park. And it's thought to be an owl, and there is some story within the Shoshone people about a cannibal owl. And it was the thought of the researcher that I worked with a lot, my mentor, Dr. Lawrence Loendorf, that this image was probably a cannibal owl image. And then this image is from a different part of the world. This is from southwestern Colorado. And these are dancers dancing with different, what would they be? I'm not really sure. I guess it's just about anybody's guess what they are, but this is called the dancers. These three figures in some kind of ceremony dancing.
Were there different types of rocks that were a better medium than others for this type of artwork?
There are, and that's one reason that North Dakota doesn't have a lot of rock art. The sandstone in North Dakota is quite friable, so it doesn't last a long time. So it's not because people didn't make images, and we do still have images carved into stones in North Dakota, but granite is very hard, and that is a more common kind of rock. The person goes up to Divide County to their county park. There is the Divide County Writing Rock in a little stone house there. And you can find those examples, but most of the time the sandstone was a lot easier to carve. And you could take just like a rock that was sharpened and use it like a hammerstone and just very quickly kind of pound out an image with it in a pecking way. But also a lot of the more recent things are done with fine incised lines. And it doesn't necessarily mean that only recent things were done in fine incised lines, but the period of time that a fine incised line might last as opposed to something that's pecked more deeply would be different, perhaps.
I wonder, Linda, if you could talk about the age of these pictographs, petroglyphs. You know, we've recently seen these caves in Europe where they've got handprints of some artist from way back when, and Indians have been on our continent for a long, long time. How old are the images?
The time period for the images varies. The ones that I documented in Montana had guns and horses. So we know that the horse arrived on the Northern Plains about 1750. So we're thinking that they are just a few hundred years old at most. But in other parts of the US, they can be quite old. Some are documented, like some of the Wyoming images that I've worked with are documented to be about 1,000 years old. And then of course, if we go, and it keeps getting pushed back now, just recently in Asia, there were some documented that were older than the Chauvet, which is, I think if I'm not mistaken, about 20, 30, 27,000 years old is what they think Chauvet Cave was. So, and these are older than that.
You know, I know we've looked at several still images of pictographs that you brought with us tonight. I guess a question I have about the pictographs, the petroglyphs, is whether or not anywhere in your findings you've come across something that might be like a visual narrative. You know, is a story, do you see a left to right story, or are they images that just sort of resonate with the truth and the proof in the image?
Well, it's actually quite complex, and people have determined that there are a number of different images. There are some images that are narrative that tell some kind of story. A site that we worked in, New Mexico, had animals with people pushing them toward nets. You know, so it told that story of the hunt, and it just happened to be at the mouth of a box canyon kind of too. So you would push the animals down, or a narrow canyon, I should say. You push the animals into an area where they couldn't get away from you. And so in some ways it tells that story, but it also is instructive to someone who would come after you that this might be a good place to string a net and try to push animals toward it. There's biographic art. A lot of the newer stuff that we see is actually, and some of it occasionally is tied to an actual artist, very rarely. But there are records in the ethnography that would actually say that so-and-so created this art. The Blue Bull panel in Canyon de Chelly in Arizona was created by Navajo in the 1860s. So it's a part on a panel that contains rock art from the basket maker peoples, which is quite a lot older than that. You know, you're going back several hundred years more. So they can reuse the same surfaces, but biographic stuff kind of connects to that. Some of it it's believed to be like mnemonic devices for storytelling. Other is ceremonially related. So it does have a variety of purposes. And it's not any one thing, but multiple different.
You know, if I may just one follow up, you mentioned the Navajo, and I think when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the Shoshone, and it's probably difficult to know given so many variables like the material that they're etching on or writing on. But is there a particular tribe that is just gung ho with pictographs and images? Is there, a group that is more inclined to it than others, seemingly?
I would say that any group of indigenous peoples anywhere in the world that had available rock surface would put images on it. So I don't know that it's any one tribe. Some of the images can be quite staggering, though, like the images from central Wyoming that are believed to be Shoshone. They are actually our stories, like the Water Ghost Woman's stories. She was a figure from their story cycle and ended up depicted in a variety of ways in that central Wyoming area. So that one would be definitely connected to the story cycles, perhaps a mnemonic device that someone could use if they weren't as familiar with the oral tradition, but it still would call up the things that they needed to say.
So I have a question in a different area, if that's all right. I wanted to ask about your work with ceramics. Could you talk a little bit about why ceramics is a medium? What is it that the medium allows you to do as an artist?
Wow. Just about anything, really. There's a lot. I mean, you can do so many different things with ceramics. It can look like so many different materials. You can, I did a metamorphosis series that I still add pieces to, but the sculptures resemble rocks. To me, they don't look a lot like rocks, but I did have someone at an exhibit I was doing once come up to me and say, "You must have really had to travel to find all these beautiful rocks." And when I told them, she just kind of looked at me like, "What?" She thought they were really rocks. So you can really make it mimic so many things. But more than that, there's something about having that squishy substance in your hands. And I don't know why, but the first class that I took, I was 23 years old, and I took my first pottery class. And I was sitting there after class was over and just marveling at the fact that it felt like coming home. When you've been gone on a long trip and you're just getting back home, it was that kind of quiet anticipation and excitement that continues to stay with me as I make ceramic objects.
But it's worth mentioning too that you've got almost your own atelier down on campus with a kiln in it and lots of students working on various clay projects all the time. It's very exciting to go down there and see all these committed artists working on this and that. And I guess that's your kind of domain down there, isn't it?
The ceramic studio is a wonderful place on campus, and I like to keep it well managed and clean, so it's healthy. And I guess I take a good deal of pride in the fact that you can do any ceramic technique between your very low fire, which is around 1860 probably degrees Fahrenheit, and your very high fire stoneware that you make dinnerware with and things, and cone 6 oxidation. You can do the low fire sculptural things. We even had a few donations of molds that I've put to good use with students. They tend to really enjoy that slip casting. So you can really do just about anything that you want in that studio. The raw materials are there, the clay is there, the wheels are there. But yeah, we have a pretty fine time down there. Nothing more exciting than getting new ware out of a kiln.
Then I'd ask a question. What is it like for students when they finally, students who are especially new to working with their hands in this way with art, what is it like for them, or what is it like working with students when they finally are able to work with this type of material?
I think your observation is a good one, that it does take some time and it takes a dedicated student. I had a student once who had at Knotstock thrown a pot and got so enthused about it. They asked if they could come to the studio and if I would help them with a little bit of throwing. And I came back the next day and they were still sitting at the wheel and they were actually turning things out. So they had really applied themselves. But the best students that get the most out of the experience are the ones that can dedicate themselves to the process and come back and come back and come back. So they learn it the best when they like come in on the class times, but also come in on the other days and just practice their skill set. And we have had some very fine students come through. Some students have gone on to be to complete MFAs in ceramics. One of those is now a local ceramist, Jim Bailey, and you maybe are familiar with his work. But they have gone on to get an advanced degree. So
I wonder, Linda, you talked about being 22 and shaping a pot. You've made a whole life as an artist. If you could go back and talk to your 22-year-old self, what could you tell them that you know now that you didn't know then about art? I'm sure lots of other things too, but about a career as an artist. What's changed in your vision, let's say?
As a 22-year-old, I did not understand that there is no greater gift in life than figuring out what it is that you love to do, what truly inspires you, and sharing that with other people who truly want to know that field. And that's been the greatest gift of my life. I did not understand that at age 22.
And is that why here later in life you've moved out into this desolate hill country where you're at right now?
Yeah. Actually, this is, I like to camp and I like to be out in those more isolated areas. And this is the place where we have camped. So there are sites on the left of me and sites on the right of me. And it is kind of nice just to be back here where the 2-track wanders down and you can set up a tent and stay there for 10 days.
Linda Olson, thank you so much for being on the program today. We really appreciate being able to talk with you and share your insights about your art.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've enjoyed visiting with you.
Well, we've reached that point of the program again where we have to bid you adieu, but before we go, we have a treat for you. This is Grayce Woods. She's an English education major here at MSU. She's going to be doing a reading of Sonnet 102 of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's birthday is coming up here, round about when you see this episode, around April 23rd. So say happy birthday to the Bard and enjoy this reading with us. And again, before we go to Grayce's reading, I just want to say one more time, this is Minot State University. Be seen, be heard, be inspired. And thanks again for watching.
My love is strengthened, though more weak in seeming. I love not less, though less the show appear, that love is merchandise whose riches seeming the owner's tongue doth publish everywhere. Our love was new, and then but in the spring, when I was wont to greet it with my lays, as Philomel in summer's froth doth sing, and stops his pipe in growth of riper days. Not that the summer is less pleasant now than when her mournful hymns did hush the night, but that wild music burthens every bough, and sweets grown common lose their dear delight. Therefore, like her, I sometime hold my tongue, because I would not dull you with my song.